In this section, we're going to be taking a look at an overview of Unity's user interface. Unity is a really fantastic piece of software that lets you create all sorts of really fantastic games and simulations, and at the same time it also manages to be a very nice and elegant games development environment to work in. That being said, it can still be a little bit overwhelming and a little bit complex, and so it's important to kind of understand the basics of exactly how Unity works and how it's organized. So without further ado, let's go ahead and take a look at some of the sub-windows that you've obviously already noticed after starting up Unity for the first time. Unity is broken up into a bunch of different sub-windows or views. In the upper left-hand corner, you can see here that we have something called the hierarchy. Down here you can see that we have the project view. It is docked with the console view. And obviously you can see that different segments of the Unity interface are tabbed, so you can actually toggle which you would like to view at any given time. In the middle, you can see that there is something called the scene view, which has this perspective grid and a camera and some other different kinds of knobs and widgets and all sorts of other stuff with a myriad of drop-downs and doodads and whatnot. We'll be going into some more details later on, so this is just a really quick broad overview. Have something called the game view. When you select that, you just see this giant expanse of blue. And then over on the far right of the screen, you can see that there's something called the inspector, which looks to be this very, very blank void. There's not a whole lot going on there. Up at the very top of the screen, you can see that there is something that looks similar to, I guess, icons that you might see on a VCR. So there's obviously a play button, there's a pause button, and something that looks like a next button. We'll be exploring these quite a bit later. So anytime that you start up a fresh install of Unity and are viewing the layout in a default fashion, which is just what Unity comes with, this is what you're going to be looking at. Now, this seems really simple, and that's great. It actually kind of most definitely is. Unity really does try to be a simple piece of software to use. Now let's go ahead and take a look at these different views in a bit more depth, so that we might get a better idea of how exactly they work and how they can help you create the games that you want to create. So probably the most obvious and probably the best place to start is this scene view. It's front and center, and it looks like it has the most going on. And so you've probably, after creating a new project, will end up with a scene that looks something like this. It'll just contain something that has a camera icon, and in the upper right hand corner it'll have various colored axes, X, Y, and Z. And you'll undoubtedly see this big, enormous perspective grid. And the scene view is really the what you see is what you get editor for Unity. And so this is where you're going to be placing three-dimensional objects, two-dimensional objects. This is where all of your very visual and tactile scene modifications are going to happen. So if you were to think about the practice of developing games similar to setting up models and like toys or something like that, this is really where you're going to be doing a lot of the hands-on stuff. For example, if I were to just go ahead and click on this camera, you can see that just by virtue of clicking on it, I now have made it active. You can see that things are changing in the inspector. You can see that there's a preview of what that camera is looking at. And you can also see that I have enabled these manipulator handles, which we'll be exploring more thoroughly later on. But just, for purpose of quick demonstration, I can click and drag these manipulator handles in order to move this camera in any direction that I see fit. So obviously, the scene view is going to be something that's very important. This is where you're going to be doing a lot of your visual manipulations. Docked alongside the scene view is the game view. The game view essentially is what the player is going to be looking at, so this is what the end product is going to look like. And you'll probably notice that it looks very different from what the scene view looks like. The game is actually just rendering out everything that the camera is looking at, and right now the camera is looking at nothing simply because this is an empty scene. But eventually we'll be using the game view quite a lot just because it provides us with an actual window of what our end consumers are going to end up seeing. The hierarchy is called the hierarchy simply because it breaks down in a hierarchical list all of the objects that exist in the scene. This isn't very impressive right now, simply because we only have a single camera in the scene, but later on, the hierarchy will be incredibly invaluable to you, as not only will it show you all the individual objects that are in the scene, but it'll provide easy access to them, and it will also give you an idea of what objects belong to or are associated with other objects. So as your scenes become more and more complex and it becomes more and more difficult to find a particular asset in all of that clutter, the hierarchy can be a great tool that allows you to quickly identify and quickly locate objects. A nice feature of both the hierarchy and the scene view is the fact that they have context-sensitive searching, so you can simply start to type the name of anything that you're interested in. For example, here I can say I'm looking for a camera. And right now, of course, that worked simply because I have a camera in my scene, and it's not very obvious as to why that's super valuable just yet. But as you can imagine, your scenes might become more and more complex, and so it might be easy to just simply type the name of what it is that you're looking for, and to have everything else kind of fade out, and for those objects that you're looking for to become much more visible. Down here in the lower portion of the screen, we have the project view. The project view contains a collection of all of the assets that are associated with a Unity project. An asset can pretty basically be thought up as any individual item that a game can consist of. So this includes things like sound files, art files, individual programming files. This can even include PDF documents. So it's these individual elements that can essentially make a game what it is. And so as we're developing scripts, we're going to be creating, or as we're developing code, we're going to be creating scripts that will belong and be housed inside of the project view. We're going to be dealing with three-dimensional shapes that will be imported using the project view. We'll be dealing with audio assets that will also be imported with the project view. So really the project view is all about storing assets. It is not really about how those assets are put into place and how they actually should behave in game. That's really more of the responsibility of the scene view. So the scene view is more about the very specific relationships between objects, the very visual stuff, and the project view is much more about the file system and the organization of where files and folders are located within your project. The console view seems really basic, and it seems like it's not doing anything right now, but the console view will be your window into what's actually happening inside of the game. Undoubtedly, as you're running through the development process, you're going to want to have an idea of what's happening under the hood, and the console provides you with great information, and you can drive what sorts of information it provides. The value of the console will become much more apparent rather quickly as we start to write our own scripts, to write our own code. Even in the absence of things visually taking effect, we'll still be able to log certain messages inside of the console in order to make sure that our code is behaving as we expected to, and it's really just a fantastic debug tool. Over here on the right-hand side of the screen, you have the inspector. The inspector is responsible for providing context-sensitive information based on whatever it is that you currently have selected. So you can see that I currently have my main camera selected. That means that the inspector is going to come to life with all the information that is specific for the camera, and specifically this camera that I have selected. So you can see that it provides me with information such as the name, the tag and layer, the transform, which includes its position, its rotation, and its scale information, provides me with all sorts of different attributes that are associated with it being a camera, and there's also a bunch of other stuff here that's a little bit complicated and is probably not worth mentioning right now. But the general idea of the inspector is that it is a way for you to view the contents of a particular object that you select. So if you wanted to modify the properties of any object, the practice would most likely look like this: selecting an object and then going into the inspector and manipulating these values in order to drive the functionality of that object. And finally, going back up to the top of the screen, we have this play, pause, and next button. We'll be using the play and pause button quite extensively simply because they're just really invaluable, especially the play button. The play button is probably one of the things that makes Unity just so easy. Anytime that you want to try out your code, anytime that you want to try out your current project, you simply click on play, It will then enable the game view and you're ready to play. Unfortunately, we haven't constructed a game yet, so the functionality of the play view seems kind of lackluster, but as we start to develop our content, of course, pressing play will be how we're going to be demonstrating and trying out all sorts of new different things and testing to make sure that our games are shaping up the way that we expect them to. And of course, while your game is playing, as you might expect, pressing the pause button will pause that single frame so that you can do any sort of analysis or inspection based on something that is happening right then and there. And that does it for a general, very high-level overview of what the Unity interface looks like.